Hello, and thank you for tuning into today's webinar. Today we launched the OECD Skill Matter additional results from the round 3 of PIAAC, which is the final phase of the first cycle of the survey. The survey of adult skills, PIAAC, was designed to provide insights into the key skills required by adults, taking into account labour market demands of technology skills as well as high-level cognitive and interpersonal skills. This report looks at skills that are required by society and how they are used at work and at home. The first survey of its kind, it directly measures proficiency in several information processing skills, namely literacy, numeracy, and problem solving in technology-rich environments. This report expands on the data and analysis in previous reports on PIAAC by including data from 6 additional countries: Ecuador, Hungary, Kazakhstan, Mexico, Peru, and the United States that conducted the survey in 2017 and 2018. Andreas Schleicher, Director of Education and Skills at the OECD, will present the results from round 3 of PIAAC Skills Matter. We'll be asking him some questions about this at the end. If you have any questions, please email them to edu.piaac@oecd.org. Also, the PowerPoint that Andreas is presenting will be available online after this event. Andreas, over to you.
Yeah, thank you and welcome. This is a very exciting moment. PIAAC is the world's only way to actually look not just what qualifications people have acquired, but what they know and what they can do in key foundations. And I have with me William Thorne and Marta Encinas Martin, actually the masterminds of the survey and also the key authors of this report. But let me just give you a little bit of background on the survey. It's based on samples. We are not testing everyone in the population. That would be testing 1.15 billion people. But we are drawing randomized samples in the participating countries and basically assess those people directly based on trained interviews who go to the households and administer the measures. And they also collect a lot of important contextual data, trying to understand how people actually use their skills at work and generally in life, and also on the conditions in which they work and live and things like this. The assessment focuses on literacy skills, numeracy, but also looks at to what extent people can solve problems in a kind of technological environment. Here are the countries that started the assessment in 2011 and 12 in orange here, and then you can see in 2014, 15 countries the assessment administered the same kind of questions, the same tests, and then the latest round we're talking about today was administered in 2017 and 18. I've marked the United States again because they re-administered the assessment. They already did take part in the first and second round, but the other ones are actually new in the assessment. So, as I already said, this is based on survey samples. We typically survey between 4,500 people to up to 27,300, and then also looked at how people use their skills. What do we mean by literacy? It's reading, but it's more than that. It's basically the ability of people not only to understand, to extract knowledge, but also to reflect on it, to evaluate it, and to show that they can sort of use quite complex material in sort of thoughtful ways. When we talk about numeracy, it's the ability to access, use, interpret, and communicate numerical information, data, numbers, mathematical ideas. It's not sort of the kind of math you know from school, complex formulas and equations. It's more the practical application of quantitative reasoning. And then problem solving in technology-rich environments. Also, this is not about, coding, advanced computer design. It's basically how we use modern technology to manage information. Opening an Excel spreadsheet, copying material from different sources, integrate different pieces of information, the kind of things that you need to do when you use technology to solve complex problems. Now, the first thing that you're going to see, and I've marked the new countries here in the lighter tone, that there's a relationship between the economic development on the horizontal axis and the test scores that we measure on the vertical axis. That's what you would expect. more advanced economies are also built on a kind of stronger pool of skills. But you also see that the relationship is not, straightforward. Look at Singapore. No? It's a very well developed economy, high income economy, but literacy scores are still sort of just around, the average. And I'm going to come back later to this. This is essentially because while young people are very well educated, have very high skills today, there's still a lot of people in the workforce in Singapore, in the population, that have much lower skills. So yes, there is a relationship. You can always say, living in a wealthier kind of economy is a good predictor for also having better skills, but there are lots of exceptions from this. What is also quite striking that yes, the new countries that have joined, most of them are more on the left side of the chart, lower levels of national income, but actually their performance in literacy is still below that prediction, what you would get from that level of national income. Now, very important, there is a clear association between numeracy skills as measured by PIAAC and the wages that people get. Now, basically what you can see, you change one standard deviation on proficiency in numeracy and you talk about 7 percentage point additional in terms of wages. But it doesn't end with money. You can see there are also strong relationships with the level of health, with the participation in volunteer activities, and with the level of political efficacy. Now, you can see people at the high end of the skill distribution see themselves as actors in society. They believe that they can change things, they can influence, what government is doing. People at the low end of the skill distribution see themselves more as objects. They do not believe that they have a say in what is done in public policy and government. And last but not least, trust. Even levels of trust are quite closely connected. Now, the causal nature of those relationships is another story. It could obviously go both ways. There could be other factors underlying this, but just take away for the moment that, literacy skills seems to be related not only to economic, but also to important social outcomes. We also see that proficiency in numeracy, and also numeracy, that you can see that here is actually, no, what I show you first is years of education. This is simply how long people have studied. And you can see also that it's a quite good predictor of wages. But then you add to this proficiency in numeracy and also the use of numeracy skills at work. And you can see all of them actually have something to do with the wages that people get. Volume of education that people have attained, that obviously captures lots of things, also whether people persist, a lot of skills that are not so easy directly to measure. But then you look at the direct test scores in numeracy and the skill use, you can see they add quite a lot of explanatory power to the wages that people attain. So first question, of course, is, what can adults actually do? In order to help you understand the results, we have grouped basically performance into 5 levels. Adults at level 1 can read very kind of short, clear-cut, basically pieces of information. They can sort of literally read a simple text, complete a simple form, and also sort of this is what you would expect, from a 10-year-old child. Basically the technical reading skills to just, process very simple information. At level 2, you can already sort of look at, different pieces of information, put them together, compare, contrast, reason about information, also making some very simple inferences and so on. When you talk about level 3, that's where people get quite proficient. That's where we sort of can deal with text structures, rhetorical devices, interpret, evaluate several pieces of information, and so on. And then adults at level 4 and 5, they can actually, use very complex information, interpret it correctly, triangulate different sources of information, the kind of things that you really would want to have in this kind of complex literacy world in which we live today. So let's see how this plays out, actually. What you can see in a country like Japan or Finland or the Netherlands, now there on the top, you can see the vast majority of people is on the good side, at least level 3, very solid foundations, lots of people level 4 and 5. But if you look at the new countries that have joined us, for example, Ecuador, Peru, Mexico at the lower end, you can see it's tiny minority of people with reasonable or advanced literacy skills, level 3 or above. And you can see the orange bar, literacy skills at level 1 and below, is very, very long. So you have a huge share of people in adult populations there who basically are left out of much of the information that they might find on the web or in advanced information sources. So huge differences in the capacity of people to process information across those levels. What's also interesting that things have really changed. I just said, Peru, Mexico, Ecuador being very much left behind. But if you compare actually proficiency level of the older generation, 55 to 65-year-olds, that's the left side of the arrow, with those of 16 or 24-year-olds, the right side of the arrow, you can see, for example, in Peru, there's a huge performance gap, meaning basically the young people are beginning sort of to catch up. The 16 or 24-year-olds have markedly better skills than the older generation, showing that, recent educational efforts, schooling, and so on have markedly improved in those countries. But, the reality is there are lots of adults that are not on the radar screen, lots of adults in the workforce who are no longer in institutions, who no longer have access to formal education, and with very, very low levels of skills. When you look, some of the other countries, in Kazakhstan, you don't see that. Actually, you could argue that the older generation is as highly skilled as the younger generation. And if you look, United Kingdom, United States, also there, you can say people moving into the workforce are no longer better skilled or not significantly better skilled than those people. So that is what these new countries should be credited for, that actually you can see a lot of progress. That progress obviously is hidden. But then you look at Singapore as well. Singapore, when you look at the older generation, they were sort of very much behind, and the younger generation is very much at the top of the distribution. What we also see is that there is quite some a relationship between the country performance on average and the variability in literacy scores. You can see what's interesting here is that you take a country like Japan, number 1 in terms of performance overall, and very little variation. When you look at the top and bottom quarter of the distribution in literacy, you can see basically there's not much of a gap. That means basically it's not just a few Japanese who are highly skilled, but most Japanese actually have very high skill levels. You contrast this with Singapore, also there you could see the average is quite okay, but huge variability. And as you could see before, that's basically variability across generation. Then you look at Peru, where you can see actually performance is very low, but also there lots of variability. Also there much of that across generations. But then you add to this also variability across social context, urban and rural environment, and so on. So I think it's important to keep both aspects in mind. How well is your population skilled on average, but also what is the variability and where does that variability come from? That tells us a lot about meaningful policy interventions. Let's talk a little bit about numeracy. Again, adults at level 1, these are people who can do very basic numerical operations. Again, what you would learn in the very earliest years of school. Level 2, there adults can perform tasks that require identifying and acting on mathematical information that are embedded already in some quite complex contexts. Level 3, that's where you sort of get quite good levels. That's basically where adults have a good conceptual understanding of mathematical kind of ideas and processes, which they can apply to contexts where this is not so obvious. They can also perform tasks that you need to pursue in multiple steps and so on. And then adults at level 4 and 5, they can really deal with very complex, abstract, or mathematical ideas embedded in contexts that are unfamiliar to them. Okay, let's see how this plays out. And you can see basically the same picture. Now you can see Japan, Finland, also Sweden, Netherlands, vast majority of people actually getting to good and very good levels of proficiency, where again, you look to Ecuador, Peru, Mexico in particular, where you talk about less than 1 in 10 adults having sort of the level of numeracy skills that you need to deal with quite, everyday context in OECD countries. When you add it up, the low performers in literacy and numeracy, adults who are at or below level 1, again, have in mind, the processing levels of a 10-year-old child. Now you can see again in Ecuador and Peru, you talk about the majority of people, and you add to this the adults who are very poor in literacy performance and the one who are very poor in numeracy performance, and you can really see this adds up to significant shares of people. But not just in those countries with lower levels of economic development. Among, you look at the United States, also there, you talk about almost 30% of adults which have, very kind of basic levels of proficiency, either in literacy or numeracy or in both. Even in top performer Japan, you still talk about 1 in 10 adults you meet on the street, basically not having even the most basic or having just the most basic or less skills that you talk about. Finally, problem solving in technology-rich environments. First of all, we have a group of people who either did not take or did not pass that test. And then you have adults at level 1, complete task in which they can sort of see a very explicit goal and for which they can perform the operations in a single environment that they know. Now again, have a spreadsheet where you add up some numbers and things like this, or open a text and things like this. Whereas in level 2, people can complete problems that have quite explicit criteria for success, where you have to triangulate, maybe multiple applications, use several steps, and so on. And then adults at level 3 who can complete tasks that involve multiple applications, a large number of steps, also where you have to resolve problems, something unexpected happens, you open up something and you see something that you didn't expect, you have to resolve small problems and so on. But what I wanted to show you just is that level 2 and 3 is not rocket science. It's basically, opening your computer and dealing with standard applications in a reasonably sophisticated way. So level 2 and 3 is probably what you would expect every adult to have in the technology-rich world in which we live today. Now let's look at this by age from the start. If I show you the figures for older adults, 55 to 65-year-olds, there you can see, on average across OECD countries, we are talking about 1 in 10 older people at level 2 or 3. 9 out of 10 people, older people you meet on the street, are not equipped for the flat world in which we live today. And then you will tell me, well, that's all resolved because, younger people are digital natives, the 16 to 25 to 34-year-olds will all be well equipped in those skills. And you can see indeed the bars get a lot longer, but still on average, you're only talking about less than every second person being ready for the digital world with levels 2 and 3. So again, every second young person that you meet on the street is not going to reach those levels 2 or 3 on this kind of assessment. So we have a lot to do to equip more people with better digital skills. What's also interesting is when you look at this across generation, the pace of improvement has been very, very different. Now look at, Finland at the top, and Kazakhstan towards the lower end. You look at the older generation and actually the problem-solving skills are quite similar. You look at the younger generation, Finland comes out number 1, and then Kazakhstan is still at the very low end of the spectrum. So you can see in Finland there's been huge intergenerational progress. And in Kazakhstan, actually progress has been more limited on that metric. Or you look to Singapore, also there, you had a very tiny share of older workers who actually have, decent technology problem-solving skills, whereas in the younger generation, it's lots of people. But even, take Finland or Singapore, you still only talk about 2/3 of young adults with decent or good kind of problem-solving skills in a technology environment, really showing us, and the technologies are racing ahead. Our environments become ever more complex, and you can see really there's a lot of work that we need to do to equip more people with better skills. Also, United States, there you can see actually in the older generation, they were well ahead of most other countries. Very much the bars is one of the longest. You look at the younger generation, it's just so. Again, the progress that people have seen over different generations in different countries has been very, very uneven. Let's look briefly at the people who have not tried the assessment. Now, they basically said, no, thank you, I don't want to do this on a computer, or they didn't succeed. And you can see if you look to Mexico, for example, a third of adults said they have no computer experience whatsoever. Then you have another kind of almost 20% who said, I don't want to do this. And then a small share of people who tried but didn't succeed. And you add it all up and you end up with more than half of the population. And the same is true in Turkey, in Peru, in Ecuador, and so on. So you can see really a lot of people not only have the requisite skills, but they are not comfortable with the digital environment that they find every day. And of course, again, that is something that varies hugely by age. As you would expect, younger people seem much more comfortable with the kind of technologies than older generations. Now, among younger people, typically you talk about 1 in 10 who who said they have no computer experience or they didn't succeed on the test, whereas among older people the share is around 1/3 of people. So it's a generational gap, but don't think so easily, well, that's going to go away then, because technology is also moving much faster, ever faster. So actually the gap could shrink, but could also grow if nothing happens. Let's look at how those skills relate to some of the social and demographic characteristics of people. We already talked about age, but immigrant background is clearly one of the kind of drivers, and that's not surprising. Often immigrants come from a foreign language background, so the literacy proficiency in the country of destination may not be as good. Age, we talked already about. Educational attainment is when you look at the proficiency gap between those who have a college degree or other kind of tertiary qualification and those who were high school dropouts, you can see that makes a huge difference. About 60 points, that's sort of a big kind of gap. Parents' education, now that's either generational inequality. And then gender, actually you see just a tiny difference between the performance of men and women. The reason why this is noteworthy is when we look at this in the PISA assessment, where we talk about 15-year-olds, you can see women are far ahead of men at age 15, but then later on, men seem to be better to advance their skills and to use their skills in literacy, and therefore, catching up with the women. I think that's the interesting part here. Well, let's have a look at a little bit in more detail on this. This is just, literacy proficiency by level of education attainment, and you can see in every country, people with a university qualification or advanced vocational degree are doing better than those who have just completed high school here in brown, and certainly better than those who have not completed high school. Well, what's so interesting is that overall the variation is very different. Look at, you take a Japanese high school graduate and they come out as well as the average college graduate, and they come out better than college graduates, a lot better than in Ecuador and Peru. So, having a degree, with the same name across countries doesn't mean that you have actually attained the same level of knowledge and skills. This chart shows you in a quite impressive ways that actually the kind of skills value of qualifications can vary hugely within and across countries. Look even at the high school dropouts in Japan. The high school dropouts in Japan still do better than the college graduate in Peru and Ecuador, and as well as those in Chile, Mexico, Kazakhstan, and Turkey. So again, we need to keep this in mind that formal qualifications, they're very important, they're good predictors of people's economic and social outcomes, but they're not really very well comparable in terms of the skills value that people have. And you can see the same thing within countries. Look at this. When you look, for example, at the lower pane, the new data from the United States, tertiary qualifications, some are very, some people with college degree are very highly skilled. Now that's the right end of the kind of bar, but others actually have much lower levels of skills. And you compare that with those who have a high school degree, and you can see there's a lot of overlap. A lot of high school graduates in the United States who have equal or better skills than some college graduates. Even high school dropouts, the lowest bar. There's a lot of overlap between those with different qualifications. And then you compare this across countries, and you can see again, what I showed you before, that the skills value of formal degrees could be very different. Now, when you translate this into absolute terms, high school dropout, well, that's not so much a surprise. You have about, in the United States, half of them who are performing at this very basic level 1 or below. But even if you look at level 2, I mentioned that is not, what you would call adequate in a modern society. You can still see there are some college graduates in the United States who fall into that category, and certainly a lot of people with high school qualifications. And it's even true in Finland. Again, half of the people with, high school degree only. Notably, there are very few people in Finland with that kind of low level of attainment. But still, if you look at them, you can see half of them have just attained level 2 on a PIAAC assessment. So this is not just a relative issue, it's also an absolute issue. Well, I talked a lot already about, performance at lower end and older ages. And you can see when you actually look at those adults who took the PISA test in 2006, if we look at that same kind of cohort when they did the PIAAC assessment, you can see things are pretty well lined up. Now, those who had good, PISA mathematics scores in 2006, later on when they were in the PIAAC age group, they also had quite good numeracy scores. Now, as a statistician, you think that's great. You have two different surveys, you tell you the same story, that's a good alignment. But if you look at this from the policy perspective, it's quite depressing. Now, what you can basically see is the kind of skills that you don't acquire in school is unlikely to catch up with this. Very few exceptions. Turkey would be a kind of interesting example here, where you can see basically, the PISA scores are not very good, but then the PIAAC scores are relatively speaking better. But overall, what it really shows is that we're not very good in enhancing or making up for early skills deficiencies. Much of what happens in kind of continuing education and training even reinforces initial skill differences. So just highlighting the importance to build foundations, strong foundations early on in life, they are a very, very good predictor for skills at later ages. The age part we already discussed. I just show you sort of one slide to just illustrate this. Probably the most depressing slide I'm going to show you. Here you can see literacy, proficiency, and also numeracy on the vertical axis, and then the age of people on the horizontal axis. And the reason why this is depressing is when you put yourself on this slide. Now, basically, what we see is that after the age of around 30, skill levels decline. A little bit of that is a cohort effect and social demographics, but even if you account for that, it doesn't change markedly. Now, the bottom line is skills that we do not use, we tend to lose later in life. And you try to do some of the, if you would give the kind of PIAAC numeracy task to a 15-year-old, they would be easy for most children. As adults, we struggle with those kinds of very basic mathematical operations. So it's not so surprising, but it's something that, shows just that our economies, our societies are not very good in maintaining and advancing the skill profile on those kinds of foundation skills. Obviously, as adults, you learn lots of other things at work, but when it comes to foundations, actually, this is the result that you see. And this is not just, for Mexico. I show you here by comparisons the OECD picture, pretty much the same kind of story. Now, gender, I already mentioned a little bit. There is a gap between men and women. In numeracy, men are at an advantage. At literacy, we see very little of a difference, really. Now, and actually, when you look to Eastern Europe here, countries like Hungary, Slovak Republic, Poland, Lithuania, Kazakhstan, the Russian Federation, there you can basically see men and women in both literacy and numeracy are equally skilled. And others, on the left side, you can see an advantage for men, clearly in numeracy, a little bit in literacy. But that's something that is also very interesting to look at by age group. I have ordered here by the advantage of proficiency in literacy by age 24 or younger. Now, that's basically the brown dot. And then you can see actually in older generations, those gaps tended to be actually in many countries bigger. Let's look at migration background very briefly. How long you've stayed in the country can be a huge determinant of your literacy performance. Now look at Finland, for example. If you have been in the host country for more than 5 years, you're doing really well. Even as immigrants, they come out quite well in terms of performance. But if you've just recently come to Finland, actually your likely proficiency is very low. And of course, those things have to do with many factors. Who are those immigrants? Now, if you have a more selective immigration policy, filter people by their education or their, certain occupations, that's maybe less of an issue. But you can see that gap can be quite large. Sweden as well, Italy. There you can see really that this plays out quite well. You also have a few countries where actually the young immigrants are doing better. That's also noteworthy, but overall there is this gap by length of stay in the country, and obviously language can be a big factor and a big barrier for people here. Let's look at the intergenerational mobility. Now, if you have parents that where at least one of your parents has attained university qualification, you're doing in most countries a lot better than if neither of your parents has a high school degree. But the gap varies across countries. And this is after accounting for all other social demographic characteristics. So what it really shows is a kind of educational capital that comes through the family is quite important. And it could, play out in very different ways. It could simply be that, those parents also have, less kind of cultural capital, less interest in education, invest less in this. There could have been less education interactions with their children, many kind of possible explanations. But the fact is that most of our societies are not doing very well in making up for those kinds of differences in parental education. Now, training, that's very important, of course. When we talk about how do people make up for skills, acquire new skills, that's education and training play an important role. As again, most adults no longer have access to the kind of formal education. They're not a captive audience of schools and universities anymore. So let's look at this. The first thing that you really see is, and that is again quite, I would say, quite disturbing, is that people with high levels of skills, level 4 and 5, have a much higher incidence and intensity to continue in education and training than those who have, just level 1 or less than that. In fact, you look to Singapore or Denmark and Chile or Finland and Sweden, you can see that, more than 80% of adults who are highly skilled actually continue to enhance their skills, to invest in their skills, whereas even in those countries, you talk just about 30–40% of adults with low levels of skills. On the right side, you have countries where not much happens for either group of people. Obviously, that's also not very good. But what is very interesting here is that for low-skilled people, training rates do not vary as markedly, but for highly skilled people, there can be huge differences across countries. But in a nutshell, those who need the training most tend to get the least out of it. Now, that's why continuing education and training tend to reinforce initial skill differences. And again, there are many reasons that can be behind this. Now, one of it is obviously for employers is much more attractive to invest in highly skilled people. That's where the returns of that investment are. It could be from the people themselves. If you didn't like school in the first place, maybe in life you don't want to go back to that kind of education and training experience. So there could be many reasons why this is like this. We have also data from earlier PIAAC analysis showing that employers invest less in people with lower skills. So But the bottom line is those who need the training most tend to get really the least out of this. Now that's all about how skilled people are, and how this breaks out by different social and demographic groups. The other part that is important is how do we actually deploy our skills? How do we extract value from the skills that we have? And let's have a look at some of this. The first thing that you see is that there is a relationship across countries between how numerate people are and how intensively they engage in numeracy practices in their lives. You can see, for example, Finland doing really well in numeracy proficiency, and people also are very actively using their numeracy practices in everyday life. Now you compare that with Kazakhstan and Turkey, they're not very highly skilled, and they're also not, being very engaged in numeracy use. So overall, you can see an important relationship across countries, and you can see a very similar relationship also within countries. Now, what's interesting, you look at countries like, Peru, Ecuador, Mexico, they are not very numerate. We have seen that before, but they're even less likely than you would predict to use their numeracy skills in everyday life. So what you can see that the social context in which they live isn't very good in extracting value from the low level of numeracy skills those people actually have. You can do the same thing at work, and you can see it's a quite similar relationship. Now, people who are more numerate are using their numeracy skills more intensively, and that's not a surprise. If you don't have numeracy skills, you're not going to get a job where those skills are being used. So it's not a real surprise in this, but you can see that there is this kind of relationship. Now, when you look at engagement in numeracy practices in your life, how intensively do you use your numeracy skills? What are the predictors of that? And you can see age is one. Older people are less likely to use their numeracy skills. When you look at younger people, the bars go all up, and that's interestingly true for workers, the green bar, for students, the gray bar, and also for employed and inactive people. The age gap is clearly there. When you look at gender, you can see the positive, the advantage that men have playing out in not only in the skills, but also in the use of the skills, then educational attainment. And there you can see what's quite interesting for high school dropout for students. That obviously has a larger effect. And then, literacy and numeracy proficiency. That's what we saw before. People who are more proficient are also using their skills more intensively. You saw that working across countries, and as you can see here, that's also working in a within country context. So what are some of the drivers that explain information processing skills? Now, when you look at reading, the use of reading skills, the use of writing skills, the use of numeracy skills, technology, problem solving, you can see the size of the firms tells you a little bit. Larger firms tending to extract more value out of the skills of people. The occupation, that's sort of the biggest determinant, and that's not a surprise. If you work in a job that doesn't is very, very manual, you're not going to use your skills. If you work in a job, in an office job, you're using more reading, writing, numeracy skills. What's interesting is problem solving is something that cuts across most occupations. That I can see less of a gap than in technology or the other cognitive skills. Then the type of industry in which you work, whether you use high performance work practices. This is basically a management culture where there is an active component on making sure that people actually have opportunities at work to use their skills. It's basically about good management, making sure that people deploy their skills effectively. Then skill proficiency, we have already talked about it, and then there is a country fixed effect as well. But this basically tells you how the kind of work environment can determine how intensively you use your cognitive skills and problem solving skills. Now, what we've also looked at, what kind of jobs do people have and what's the automation potential? We know that routine cognitive skills are more likely to be automated and less technology intensive skills. And you can see basically You look at a country like Peru, where you can see literacy skills, numeracy skills are still quite low, and there is a lot of jobs in those countries, Peru, Mexico, Ecuador, that are actually impacted by digitalization. That doesn't mean that the entire job is going to disappear, but that kind of tasks in that job are likely to disappear, and people don't seem to be very well prepared for that. Now, you look at the other end of the spectrum in Norway, you worry less about this because people do things with high skills that are harder to digitize, to automate, to outsource. So I think that's something that adds to the kind of urgency to address the kind of skill issue in countries at the left end of the spectrum. Last but not least, briefly on the outcomes, and I sort of highlighted some of this already. Here you can see the effect of education, years of education, that's the bar, and then proficiency, the numeracy score, that's the dot, on being employed. And you can see basically in most countries, clearly education, but in the majority of countries also, the numeracy score is a quite good predictor for being employed. Not a surprise, but it's something that we can actually show with data. And you can see the same with wages. Years of education, how long you studied, it's a very, very strong predictor. You can see basically you change years of education by one standard deviation, and you can see sort of, but on average, almost 20% of a kind of wage kind of advantage. And then again, you can see also by numeracy and by the use of numeracy skills. Now, again, in terms of your wage, it doesn't only matter what numeracy skills you have, but it's also important that you deploy those, that you use those numeracy skills. No? And you can see, for example, you look at Singapore on the right side, you can see the numeracy skills are a good predictor, but the use of numeracy skills is sort of a less strong predictor on this. Now, but both parts of the equation matter. If you don't have skills, you can't use them, that's obvious, but if you have those skills, it still doesn't guarantee that you actually extract value out of them at work. What we also know from PIAAC is that some people have better qualifications than someone getting into their job really needs, and some don't have the qualifications that someone would need to get that. And we add them up, mismatch the overqualifications, that's the green bar, the dark green bar, and the underqualified share of underqualified people, that's the kind of light green bar. And you can see actually we're talking about a third of people on average across countries. When you look at literacy mismatch, here it gets more interesting. This is basically where you can see these are people who are have higher levels in a green bar, a dark green bar. These are people who have higher level of literacy skills than someone getting into their job would typically has. Now that's how this is measured, and you can see also there are some people underskilled. What's first striking is that literacy mismatch is generally much smaller than qualification mismatch, telling you we've actually also in earlier analysis drilled down on this. What this actually tells you is that some people who have university qualifications actually don't have the skills that are requisite. So employers in the end seem to be quite good at actually seeing the skills that people have. The direct skill mismatch is much lower than the qualification mismatch. The signals that formal qualifications provide don't seem to be as great as when you can measure skills directly. And then, people work in a field that is different from what they studied. There you can see that's quite typically the case. And that's probably in today's world what you expect. The labor market changes, you study something, and then you end up working somewhere else. That's probably something that is not sort of so much of a surprise. So in the end, I mean, when you talk about both underskilled and overskilled people, now you have 10–15% in those categories, not actually a lot of people who are not quite effectively matched to their current kind of occupations. Now, all of this has consequences. If you're overqualified for the job that you do, you're not going to get the money that you would expect. Now, that's very normal. Why should your employer pay you for qualifications that are not required at your job? or that you may not actually, or for skill levels that you actually may not have, when we again have over signaling. And you can see also an effect of people who are over-skilled, but that is much smaller. So again, showing you that often employers are quite good to see through this. And then field of study mismatch is where we don't see much of an effect in the majority of countries. But just to tell that actually mismatch does have consequences on the wages that people actually get. Yeah, that's really all I wanted to share with you. You have the publication with all of the analysis, but we also have a number of other data products that I think are really important. There is the Data Explorer, where you can actually, quite simple ways extract, interesting analysis from you. There is, if you want to, go deep into this, you can use the public use files, where basically you can replicate all of the analysis that we have done and extend them. And we also provide, if you want to know what questions were exactly asked, we can give you the background questionnaire and many of the tools to actually use and manipulate the data. And that's really all I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andreas. We now have a little bit of time for some questions, so let's get straight into it. What we probably first want to ask is that there's lots of skills that are important for adults to be successful in society. I think we can all agree with that. Why did PIAAC choose to just look at literacy, numeracy, and problem solving as the ones for this survey?
Yeah, there are two answers to this. One is that those skills are of fundamental importance. Almost anything builds on literacy skills. Now, you're not going to be skilled in many other domains without being able to access, manage, integrate, evaluate, and reflect on written information. So that is a pretty obvious answer. The technology and numeracy as well. We know actually from research that numeracy is an even better predictor for important economic and social outcomes. And then the technology part is something that everybody sees technology around them. It was important to see how well actually people are prepared for the flat world. That's the one answer. These skills are just of fundamental importance. But there's a second answer, and that is we know how to measure them. We do know, for example, that social and emotional skills, can you work with people who are different from you? Are you resilient? There are lots of important skills that we don't yet know how to measure as well. So, and we need to be honest, that's part of the explanation.
Excellent. Another question, the 3 rounds of the survey took place at 3 different times. How did the survey respond to the changing nature of skills required by adults at those particular times? Was there some modification?
Yeah, that's a good question. In fact, we have basically used the same conceptual framework for measurement. And you might sort of contest that. You might think, well, there has been a change in the use of reading and numeracy skills, or certainly in technology-rich environments, problem solving in technology-rich environments. But keep in mind that we are looking at the entire adult population, and that those kinds of skills certainly evolve very, very slowly. In fact, you could see that over time. So we are reasonably confident that we can meaningfully compare those estimates for this relatively short period. We're going to do another survey where we do change the metrics in the next kind of big PIAAC round. But so far we have kept the same kind of conceptual framework because we're reasonably confident that over the period of time that we are talking here, those changes, certainly in the stock of skills, are likely to be very small.
Another question is that in some countries, being more skilled as an individual doesn't necessarily mean you get higher wages or have the same chance of employment. I suppose the first part of that question is, why do we think that is? Does PIAAC tell us the why? And also from that, do we think that upskilling adults is an important thing that policymakers should invest in?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, that in some countries skills seem to be playing out more in terms of economic and social outcomes than in others. And in part that has to do with the intensity of skill use. I'll give you an example. You compare the United States and Japan. As you could see, Japan, adults are very highly skilled at the high end of the skill spectrum. Almost all of them, women, men, disadvantaged, advantaged, older, younger, they're all doing really well on this PIAAC test. And but when you look at skill use, at work and at life, you can see huge differentials by gender. No? The kind of labor market in Japan is very rigid, very siloed, not really good in translating, better skills into better jobs and better lives. And then you contrast it with the United States, where you have the opposite phenomenon. You basically have, quite patchy skills, no? A lot of low-skilled people. But the labor market seems to be very, very good in turning better skills into better jobs and better lives. So when you have good skills, you get a chance to use them. Whether you're a woman or a man, whether you come from a disadvantaged or privileged background. And that's a big advantage of the US economy, now that it could do a lot better in equipping people with skills. But when it comes to extracting value from it, it does quite well. Now, you ask yourself, which problem is easier to fix? The increasing the stock of skills, now where the US has a huge issue, is going to be taking, huge amounts of effort, huge amount of times, particularly when we talk about older people. Whereas in the Japanese case, you make your labor market more responsive to skills, more flexible, you open up more kind of opportunities. That's a much easier problem to solve and probably could also yield in good productivity gains. But that sort of the skill use is clearly one dimension that distinguishes country. Now, again, what it tells us is that great skills are not enough. We also need to make sure that people get a chance to use them.
I suppose this is quite related. You were talking about mean numeracy proficiency and how PISA and PIAAC results, as a policymaker, this would be depressing because you can predict PIAAC results based on PISA. I suppose then what sort of advice would you give for policymakers, particularly when looking at facilitating adult training and these sorts of things? How would a policymaker go about, or what would you say a policymaker should go about doing?
Yeah, my first message really is to focus relentlessly on the foundations. Basically, what PISA tells us is that all young adults can achieve really well. It is possible to equip every young adult with actually a very strong set of foundations. It's just not happening in many countries, in many places, but in some it does. And there's no shortcut to this. If you don't do this, you face an uphill struggle. I think that's a clear reality when you look at this data, that it's very, very hard to moderate initial skill differences later in life. Now, that being said, the reality is that there are lots of low-skilled adults in our workforce, and it also means that we have to do better to target training opportunities to ensure that training is available, that there are incentives for both people and employers to invest in learning at the workplace, and so on. I think that's something where public policy can do a lot better. Why do I say this? Because you could see the big differences across countries. In some countries, that kind of gap between high and low skilled and access to training was much smaller than in other countries. So I think we can do better in targeting training opportunities, but making kind of lifelong learning a reality for all is absolutely crucial in the world in which we live. You cannot expect anyone to accept they're going to lose their job because a robot is going to take over if they don't feel prepared to either get or create a new job. So actually investing in the knowledge and skills of older workers is going to be crucial. And it's something that we need to do when people are at work, not when people, have dropped out of work and have lost sort of their train. So I think that is a big kind of message to public policy. It's going to require lots of resources. But as you could see from the data, the returns on that investments are very strong.
Excellent. I think we probably only have time for 2 more questions. So one thing that you were mentioning was that the younger generation, even the younger generation, only 1 in 2 people are at that level 2, 3 for problem solving in a digital environment. Sort of the 2 questions, I suppose, first one is what do you think we can do to equip more people with digital skills, particularly the younger generation? Why is that not happening? And then the second and last question is, we found that quite surprising. Was there anything else that you found was surprising in this latest round of PIAAC results?
Yeah, when it comes to digital skills, the tempting answer is, well, let's teach 3-year-olds coding and let's put lots of technology into schools. I'm not sure that is necessarily the answer. At least there is no indication that it is from these data. I think a lot has to do with really cognitive information processing skills. Now, in the past, when you taught someone to read, it was about, extracting information from written text that had, been written by an author. You could trust the information to be true. You know, if you didn't know the answer to a question, you could look it up in an encyclopedia. And again, you could rely on that information. Today, when you look up information, you know, you look it up on Google and you get 10,000 answers to your question, and nobody tells you what is right and what is wrong, what is true and what is not true. Literacy is no longer about just extracting knowledge. It's about constructing knowledge. And I think those kinds of cognitive processing skills are at the heart of technology-rich problem solving in technology-rich environments. So I think that's where I would, you know, put the premium on the cognitive skills underlying problem solving in this technology environments. And then, you know, the technical skills are probably going to be very time dependent. You know, the kind of technologies that people will need tomorrow may be very, very different than those that they need today. I would expect, for example, that the real technical skills may even diminish. You know, technology will get better. You know, the spreadsheets and all of those things will become more intuitive. You know, we may all interact with our computers by talking to them or even, you know, thinking with them. But the cognitive skills to actually access, manage, integrate, reflect, evaluate information, data, you know, relations, that will retain. And I think that's where the priority really needs to be. And it seems the worrying part to me really is that even many young people don't seem to be equipped to deal with this. Now, surprising findings. Again, there are many surprises in this. I think for me, the most surprising finding was that actually the poor relationship between the qualifications that people once attained and the skills that they actually have now. When you remember those overlapping bars, you could see, you know, some, you know, high school graduates being much highly skilled, meaning, you know, either the quality of education varied hugely or they had opportunities to build skills that they didn't have before. But I think that the kind of signals that we normally rely on, years of education, the formal degrees, don't seem to be really very reliable predictors of our actual skills.
Excellent. Look, I think that that's about all the time that we have. Thank you, Andreas, for your presentation, and for all those that have been able to tune in for your interest in this topic and the OECD's work on education. If you'd like to find out more about what we've talked about today, you can find the publication on the OECD iLibrary under the title Skills Matter, Additional Results from the Survey of Adult Skills. If you'd like even more information, please feel free to go to the PIAAC OECD website or email us at edu.piaac@oecd.org. Once again, thank you for joining us.